Hello and welcome to another episode of the Iraqi Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Juma Iraqi, and today I'm joined by Dr. Krissy Kendall. Krissy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. We're going to talk a bit about citrulline malate today. That's today's topic. Before we start with that, I just want to mention that this podcast is available on YouTube in video format, but if you prefer to listen to it in audio only, you can also find it on iTunes. So it's a great pleasure to have you on the show, and I think we'll have a lot of interesting discussions on citrulline malate. So before we start, could you just give us a brief introduction about yourself so people know who you are?
Absolutely. So as you introduced me, my name is Krissy Kendall. I am currently the science editor for bodybuilding.com, and I've been with the company for 2.5 years, or officially be 2.5 years next month. I received all 3 degrees, my bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. from the University of Oklahoma, working under Dr. Jeffrey Stout, who is now at Central Florida. And so my degrees are in exercise physiology, but a lot of my research focus, a lot of my interest lied in supplementation as well as nutritional interventions for improving performance, both in recreationally active individuals and athletes and things like that. Excuse me. So that's where a lot of, the last, I guess it's been 5 years now. I just had a Facebook notification 5 years ago. This past weekend was when I graduated with my PhD. So it's crazy. It's been only 5 years. But prior to my job at bodybuilding.com, I was an assistant professor at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. And same thing, my research there as well as the research that my graduate students did. We worked a lot with supplements as well.
Okay, excellent. Are there any specific supplements that you looked at?
Oh man, yeah, a lot. So I've done research with creatine, with beta-alanine. That I did a lot with Abby Smith-Ryan, Dr. Abby Smith-Ryan, who's at UNC Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. Her dissertation, and then some of the work we did earlier. Actually, my very first research study as a master's student was with beta-alanine, and that was a continuation of a study that she had started. So she kind of got me into doing beta-alanine research, but we also did creatine. We did quite a bit with, multi-ingredient supplements, things with a mixture of creatine, BCAAs, beta-alanine, to just look at overall performance benefits. I've done stuff with fat burners or thermogenics, I guess we should call them, looking at fat loss. Done a little bit with different variations of whey protein. So your whey protein isolate, concentrate, things like that. Trying to think if there's anything else that sticks out in my head. Kind of your basics, caffeine. Mm-hmm. Nothing too crazy. And then a lot, like I said, multi-ingredient products as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I've actually had Dr. Abby Smith-Ryan on the show previously. We did a podcast, I think it was last year, on high-intensity interval training, because I know that's the area she's focusing a lot on.
Yes.
Yeah. And she's also had, I just recently read a paper from her and Eric Trexler. Mm-hmm. They were looking at physique competitors, because I know they do some research on that area as well.
Right, yeah. And then when I was still at the University of Oklahoma, we actually he was a year behind me. His name was Chris Foss. He was a competitive bodybuilder, and that was the first time I was really introduced into the whole world of competitive bodybuilding and what all went into it. And it was actually a really interesting case study that himself, Lindy, his now wife, Jeremy Lineker, David Fukuda, and I think there was maybe one other researcher on the paper that I might be forgetting, that they put together this case study. And I got to help out with a few of the data collections when David wasn't around, but they did every single possible measure, 6 months before his competition and 6 months after his competition. Everything from blood markers to anaerobic measurements, aerobic measurements, body composition measurements. And we were lucky that we had everything at OU. Mm-hmm. We could do it all in-house. And it was really, really interesting to see the metabolic, the physiological changes, the blood variations that happen, blood pressure, heart rate, blood flow dilate, like everything you could think of. We tested it on Chris Foz, both pre and post, as he reverse dieted out of his competition diet. And it was really, really interesting. And so it was very cool to see Eric do kind of not a similar thing. And I don't want to say a follow-up, but continuing that sort of line of research, because it's, working at bodybuilding.com, I see a lot of it and it's gaining interest. And this more so the interest in what's really happening to the body during competition and after competition. It's pretty cool that we're actually doing research on it now, rather than just saying, well, you lose weight and then you gain weight back. We're actually seeing the potential damage that it does to the body, mm-hmm. And how to try to make it less damaging. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's an area that has gotten a lot more interest in recent years. That what actually happens with the body during pre-contest. I'm actually doing I'm doing my master's at the University of Stirling, but I'm doing data collection at the Norwegian School of Sports Science in Norway, and they're currently running recruiting for a study on physique competitors. That they're gonna measure the changes that occur during the diet. So it will be interesting to see what they find there. So yeah. Okay, so let's dive into the questions. Like I said, today's topic is citrulline malate. So if we can just start by telling what citrulline malate is, and maybe also include the comparison between citrulline malate and L-arginine, if we can do that as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So interestingly, citrulline malate, it's two compounds, if you will, or two things, not just one. So we don't naturally have citrulline malate occurring. It's not a product on its own, or it's not an ingredient on its own. So we often hear of citrulline. And a lot of times you hear citrulline and arginine grouped together. So we'll kind of talk about that. But so citrulline malate, if you will, is just citrulline combined with malate or malic acid. I like to think of it as you kind of get two benefits, or two kind of separate benefits by combining those two together. So you've got L-citrulline, which by itself is involved in the urea cycle. So it's really beneficial for helping to remove metabolic byproducts that accumulate during high intensity based activities that ultimately lead to fatigue. So ammonia, lactate, inorganic phosphate, all of the byproducts that we discuss when you're doing any sort of repeated sprints, submaximal weightlifting, and you're going to exhaustion. All of those things that start to accumulate in the blood that ultimately result in you stopping what you're doing because you're fatigued and you can't go any longer. So that's where L-citrulline comes into play. It's involved in the urea cycle, so it helps to remove and prevent the accumulation of those. It's also used to increase arginine production. And this is where it gets interesting, because you think, well, can't I just take arginine? And that's where, we see it in a lot of pre-workouts or products in themselves is, oh, I take arginine. Well, the benefit to taking citrulline rather than arginine is arginine will have to go through the liver, where it usually gets broken down so much that you don't actually have a lot of arginine in the blood by the time it passes through the liver. Well, citrulline can bypass that, and it can't go to the blood, where it then can be used to increase arginine concentrate, or the amount of arginine in your blood, which can then be used to increase nitric oxide production and allowing for vasodilation, an increase in blood flow, an increase in nutrient delivery, and things like that. So kind of two sides along citrulline in just itself is the urea cycle that it's involved in, as well as an increase in arginine that can help with increasing blood flow because of blood flow dilation or vasodilation. So that's kind of citrulline. And then we combine it with malate or malic acid. Malate's involved in the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle, and it's used as an intermediate, and it essentially allows for more aerobic production of ATP to occur. So ultimately, when we can produce more ATP, we have more energy. So you've got citrulline, which helps to prevent fatigue, plus malate or malic acid, which can help produce more ATP, right? The idea behind supplementing is that you fatigue less and you have more energy. It seems pretty awesome, on paper when you look at it that way. And we'll talk a little bit about the research, but taking citrulline alone, although it's been shown to increase the amount of arginine in the blood, we haven't seen that translate to performance benefits. But if you take it as citrulline malate, there's been multiple studies in both men and women to show performance benefits. And then to go back to arginine, how is it different? Like I said before, if you take arginine on its own, most of it doesn't even reach your blood. So although arginine can be used as a vasodilator, or that's what it's thought to be used as in a performance setting, it really doesn't have a huge benefit because there's not much that gets into the blood that can create or produce enough nitric oxide to have a vasodilation effect in that sense.
Yeah, and if you look at the research on arginine, there have been a couple of studies that have been using fairly high dosages of arginine, and still you don't see what it's basically what people wanted arginine to be, citrulline malate turned out to be.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting because when you look at how I don't want to say it's a new supplement or it's a new ingredient. We're already in 2017, and there's research that for a performance aspect, it's, early 2000s it's been looked at. But originally, the idea was to use it for people suffering from actual clinical skeletal muscle fatigue disease. I guess I don't know if any of that even made sense. Asthenia, which would be a diagnosed condition where your skeletal muscles fatigue very, very quickly. You can't do a whole lot. And that's where, citrulline malate first saw its use, both in rat models where they caused them, because of endotoxins, they basically forced them to have higher rates of fatigability. So they gave them citrulline malate, and they showed that in rat models that it helped them delay fatigue or resist fatigue. But then also in disease populations, if you will, where they're not even doing high intensity activity, they're just at a higher risk of fatiguing quicker, that citrulline malate was beneficial for them. So that's kind of where it started from in those sorts of populations, and then translated to more of a athletic population. And okay, if it works in this group, what's going to happen? When we test it out in different settings, weight training, cycling, wind gates, things like that.
Excellent. Now, which type of, before we move forward, what type of diseases was the biggest area where they focused the research on regarding citrulline?
Yeah, so asthenia, which is ASTHENIA, it's just, it's considered a fatigability of skeletal muscle. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest area. It's the citrulline malate is just seen as a compound that helps to reduce or considered anti-fatiguing. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest area in non-athletic populations that's been used for. And again, not a whole lot of research. Like if you type that into PubMed or Google Scholar, you're not going to have a whole bunch of information on that. You probably will come up with more of that in a rat or a mice model, because what they could do is essentially force create that same sort of disease in a short term, right? We can do that using an animal model. So they gave them a bacteria, an endotoxin, to have that same effect, to cause the muscles to fatigue very, very rapidly. And then when those rats were given citrulline malate, they noticed that their muscles were able to resist fatigue and maintain force or power output for a longer period of time compared to when they weren't given the citrulline malate.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Is there any research related to diseases that you want to increase blood flow, for example, if that can be beneficial for the disease?
Right. And that's been seen too with not just citrulline malate, but also citrulline, because that citrulline on its own can do that, has been shown to, because its property and its ability to increase arginine to a greater extent than arginine on its own, which then that's arginine is one way that you can stimulate nitric oxide production. And that again helps to vasodilate or increase blood flow. So yeah, there have been uses for that in different populations, and which let me backtrack real quick. There have been a couple studies that have looked at citrulline malate and changes in blood pressure as well as blood flow mediated dilation, and haven't noticed any changes in that. And we can get to that in a second, because now I don't want to go too far off your question. But when we talk about dosing of citrulline malate, most of it's just a one-time. It's an acute dose. So it's where citrulline is more of a chronic, or you could take it for a week at a time or something like that. So kind of get back to that later when we talk about dosing and things like that. But that could be why we typically don't see citrulline malate used more so in clinical populations or disease populations where we would want to see changes in blood flow. An increase in blood flow is because most of the research with citrulline malate is a one and done type thing. There was one study done by, I'm going to probably mess up his name. I have it written down somewhere. I think it's Badahan. Excuse me, I'm going to mess that up. But that was the longest study that I saw, where he took subjects that were not diagnosed as having any sort of disease, but they complained of chronic fatigue in their muscle. And he did supplement them for 15 days. Usually, mostly all citrulline malate is 1 day, one time. And he did notice that following 15 days, although they started to experience less fatigue in as little as 7 days, they were testing them repeatedly, gave them the full dose or the full supplement period of 15 days. They had increased rates of phosphocreatine resynthesis or recovery after exercise. They had lower ratings of fatigue following exercise, and they had higher rates of oxidative or aerobic ATP production during exercise. So that was, and again, these weren't clinically diagnosed as having any sort of chronic condition, but they did complain a lot about, they were always fatigued. And so kind of in a longer duration study, it could potentially be used in other chronic conditions. But as far as citrulline, really anything that has, compromised blood flow, reduced blood flow. There are a couple conditions where chronic conditions where they have issues clearing or removing excess citrulline, that would be the only thing you would watch out for. Taking high amounts of citrulline, if your body can't clear citrulline at a fast enough rate, you'd want to watch out for that. But it's not a rare condition, but it's not a very common condition to have.
Yeah, excellent. Now, moving over to dosages, because there's a couple of recommendations that people sometimes hear. Could you just clear that up? What type of dosages seems to be effective for, if we were just focused on, if we take performance first?
Yes. So what's been used in the research the most, and what I would recommend, would be 8 grams. Mm-hmm. There is a kind of a scale. So people will say between 6 and 10 grams. But if you look at 90% of what the research says or has used, it's 8 grams. I'll go back to the study that I talked about that supplemented for 15 days. They did use 6 grams, but that was used for 15 days. Every other acute study that was a one dose, it was all 8 grams. So not only do I recommend 8 grams because that's what's been used in the research and has been shown to have the benefits, but also that's the same dose that has been shown to not have any adverse side effects. The only adverse side effect that I came across in one study, some of the participants, I believe it was 15% of the participants, so not a large percentage, did complain of some GI distress, which isn't uncommon. A lot of ingredients or a lot of supplements can do that, especially depending on if you ate right before you took the supplement or if you had something in your stomach. Some people will say to take it on an empty stomach or not, right after a big meal, and that can help ease any sort of GI discomfort. But most studies, not even one subject complains of GI distress, and that's with 8 grams. There's not a whole lot of studies looking at a upper limit. So could you take 15 grams? Maybe. I don't know necessarily that's going to be toxic, but could you then potentially have side effects like GI discomfort? You run the risk of that. So I would tell people stick to 8 grams. It's probably your best bet. The biggest problem I see with trying to get 8 grams is when you see it as a part of a pre-workout, which is where citrulline malate should be. When we talk about timing, you should take citrulline malate an hour before your workout. So it should be in a pre-workout or something that you would take as a pre-workout. Not a lot of products have 8 grams or even 6 grams, right? We talked about the one study that had 6 grams and still found a benefit to it. So 6 grams, you might be okay. Most of them have like 3 grams. And although there has not been a dosing study that did, 3 grams versus 6 grams versus 8 grams versus 10, we haven't seen that study yet. The fact that low doses of citrulline haven't shown much of anything, and that 8 grams has been seen the most benefit with citrulline malate. That's the biggest issue I see with a lot of products out right now is not the proper dosing in them. So you have to kind of get clever and make sure you read the label. There's a few out there. There are a few out there that have them properly dosed, but you just have to be careful about it. Just because it says citrulline malate on the label, you want to make sure that it's enough in there.
Yeah, and that goes in like generally when you look at pre-workouts, you should, like, if there's a pre-workout that has 5 grams for a total dosage and you have creatine, beta-alanine, citrulline malate in it, that should probably be a red flag that it's...
Right. You need 5 grams of creatine, so where does everything else fall? Yeah,
exactly. But I think the issue for the manufacturers of supplements when using citrulline malate in pre-workouts at the effective dosage is that it basically tastes like battery acid, so it completely destroys the flavor of the pre-workouts. So I know that some supplement companies often complain about you having to use a lot of flavor and other stuff to camouflage the bitterness of citrulline, because Yeah, that should be a punishment or something like that. You have to
Yeah.
drink straight citrulline malate without any flavor.
Well, and we have a couple products that we sell that have 6 to 8 grams of citrulline malate with other things in the pre-workout with your caffeine. I think they also do include beta alanine and creatine, although those aren't necessarily time dependent. They don't necessarily need to be in your pre-workout, but because of the flavoring, the scoops, the amount, they're like 30 gram pre-workout. I mean, it's literally a protein scoop, right? Most proteins are 30-gram scoops. That's your pre-workout scoop. So yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, when is too much? Too much. Like, now you're taking, a big shaker bottle right before you go work out. You can't just chug it. Otherwise you're going to have all this water left in your system. So, I can understand why either people just don't put it in there or they put in too little, but then, yeah, what's the point if you're it's not like beta alanine or creatine where you take it over time and you build up the stores. It's you need to have that full dose if you want the benefit of it, because it's acute effects from it. You won't have this over time gradual increase in the stores of resting citrulline malate you have in your body. That's not how it works. So if you do want the benefits of it, if it's what you're going after, you have to make sure you have the right dosage for it.
Yeah. Another thing that I've seen some supplement companies do is they will make a pre-workout with caffeine, beta alanine, creatine, and etc. And then they'll sell you a tub of citrulline malate on the side as a bundle, just to not interfere with the flavoring.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I actually I've used citrulline malate myself and see benefits from it, and I've used it with some of my clients as well. So what I found is, if you're gonna take citrulline malate on your own, you should use some, like I've used Sprite Zero for flavoring, and it actually tastes quite good when you use Sprite Zero to get it down, or sugar-free Mountain Dew or something like that.
Right, or like mixing one of the like Crystal Light flavor packets or things like that. And because you want to have, you want citrulline and malate to be at their peak levels, ideally you take it 45, 60 minutes before your workout. So you don't have to chug it, so if you mix it with, your Sprite Zero, your Mountain Dew, your Crystal Light, whatever, you can, be drinking it, an hour before, as you're starting to get ready for the gym, as you're finishing up something at the office. And you don't have to like take a shot of it, all in one scoop right before. So, to get the best benefit out of it, you definitely want to take it before you start walking into the gym. You talk about the benefits of it and it being able to clear out metabolites. That's happening during your workout, not after your workout. So you want to make sure that you're optimizing at the beginning, at the start of your workout, so you have highest levels of it in the blood.
Yeah, exactly. But does usually when you take pre-workouts, you have creatine and beta alanine in it, but those don't have any acute effects. You have caffeine and citrulline malate sometimes in. Like, I think the only product I've seen with an effective dose is Jim Stupani's pre-workout that has about 6 or 8 grams in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd have to double check, but I think Caged Muscle, I believe the Caged Muscle pre-workout has 6 grams of citrulline malate, but I'd have to double check that, but I'm almost positive. And I think those are the only two, and they're both exclusive. Well, not anymore. The Gym line isn't, but Cage Muscle is another bodybuilding.com one that we're starting to get a little bit better about formulating products and making sure that the right dosage are in them. Yeah,
that's good. So does citrulline malate have any synergistic effect with other ingredients?
This is a really good question, and I looked a lot for this one. And there's really not really combined or done studies with it. But if you think about kind of the benefits with, or what you can expect from citrulline malate, there's some things that you could think like, oh, well, I'll add it to it. Now I've done 2 studies using citrulline or citrulline malate, one with citrulline malate, in a multi-ingredient supplement. And most of the ingredients were ones that are not timing dependent, and they don't have any real acute effects. So meaning it was creatine, beta-alanine, citrulline. Then they had branched chain amino acids and caffeine. So I think you see that a lot because we know caffeine, as you just mentioned, caffeine has an acute effect. Citrulline or citrulline malate has an acute effect. BCAAs, depending on the type of activity that you're using, we know that for longer duration or activities that lead to high rates of fatigue, central fatigue potentially, that's one of the proposed mechanisms for BCAAs. So there could be a potential synergistic effect between the 3 of those. And the studies that we used, that multi-ingredient product, another one, it was citrulline malate, caffeine, BCAAs, beta-alanine, creatine as well. So they were different products, but very similar ingredient lists. In one study, we found that the multi-ingredient supplement led to increase in repetitions, performed till exhaustion, increase in reaction time. So similar things that you would see with citrulline malate or caffeine on its own. Also, we saw improvements in mood scores. Again, things that our cognitive scores, we've seen that with caffeine as well. In the other study, we saw improvements in repeated interval ability to complete more intervals. So kind of the repeated sprint ability, something that we've seen with caffeine. And again, possible combinatory effect with citrulline malate as well. So I think you would possibly see a benefit there. Anything that might help with nutrient delivery. So one of the benefits is citrulline and citrulline malate would be an increase in blood flow and nutrient delivery. There's one study that was done, published in JSCR, I believe, that gave citrulline malate to a group of trained men. And not only did they find improvements in performance, but 24 and 48 hours following activity, those who took citrulline malate reported less feelings of muscle soreness or less muscle soreness. And that's possibly likely due to an increase in nutrient delivery, because neither citrulline or malate, the properties aren't directly related to, reducing muscle breakdown or speeding up recovery, but more so the delivery of nutrients. So really anything else, if you take anything with citrulline malate, the idea that it's delivered to the muscle at a much faster rate, rapid rate. So potentially BCAAs as well to speed up the recovery process, to reduce muscle soreness. In untrained individuals, there are a few studies that have shown that BCAAs taken have reduced muscle soreness during high volume squats or high volume resistance training. So again, taken together, you might see an improvement in that area as well with muscle recovery, muscle soreness.
Okay, excellent. Now, on to the final question. What type of sports would you say would benefit the most from using citrulline malate?
Yeah, so the main category would be any anaerobic sport, really. And so we'll kind of hit on some of the research that's been done, but that's by far the population that they've hit on. So not your endurance athlete, not your long distance runner. It's not really going to do anything if you wanted to do an hour of steady state cardio, probably not going to feel any effect. If you go back to thinking about citrulline's main purpose, main effect, is within the urea cycle to remove metabolic byproducts. So anything that's going to increase the production and the accumulation of ammonia, lactate, hydrogen ions, inorganic phosphate, anything like that. Sprinting, repeated sprints, weightlifting where you do like hypertrophy-based weightlifting. 1RM, probably not, because you're not doing enough volume to increase those byproducts. Anything like that. Team sports, where there's a lot of running back and forth, stop and going, but for a long period of time, anything like that. That's probably where you're going to see the most benefit. They've done studies with populations, well-trained resistance men, well-trained resistance women. They've done masters tennis athletes. They've also done recreationally active individuals as well. So not all top of the line elite athletes. There's one study that used amateur cyclists. So for the most part, pretty high level athletes. Most of the studies, the protocols that they've put them through have been obviously fatiguing, putting them through pretty exhausting workouts. But a lot of them, they've looked at fatiguing sets of lower body and upper body exercises. So have them do 5, the highest I saw was up to 8 sets of either upper body or lower body exercises. And they will just see how many repetitions can they get in each set. And across the board, hands down, every single study, they show that the groups who take the citrulline malate are able to perform more repetitions as you get through more and more sets. So sometimes, maybe in set 1 and 2, they're pretty even because you're feeling fresh. You're not so fatigued. But sets 3, sets 4, 5, 6, however many, it's so clear. And in some cases, up to 50% more repetitions are completed when the groups are taking citrulline malate. There was a study that used the 15-day protocol, 6 grams a day. They actually looked at and were able to see that during completion and actually during the exercise, that ATP was being produced at a higher rate, oxidative ATP was being produced at a higher rate, and then phosphocreatine or PCR was being resynthesized, was being recovered at a higher rate following citrulline malate supplementation. So it kind of just gives proof or highlights the effects of both citrulline and malate working together, helps with energy production, as well as the clearance of byproducts that cause fatigue. So like I said, kind of the low intensity, steady state, or 1 rep, 1 RM testing, anything that doesn't really require repeated effort, probably not going to see a huge benefit from citrulline malate.
Okay, excellent. I know there's been the tennis study that you mentioned. There's been actually quite a few studies focusing on citrulline malate the last 2 years. There's been a couple of, I think it's 4 or 5 studies, and they've been fairly consistent with the results, showing that you do get less sore, you recover better, you do more repetitions, and you basically can perform better, to sum it up. And for the bros out there, it might also have an effect on the pump when you work out.
Exactly. Well, and that all goes back to the fact that it helps to dilate your blood vessels. Mm-hmm. We actually wrote an article for BBCom. I guess it came out last month, but that was kind of the joke when I was editing it. It's, you get the best of both worlds. You actually get the performance benefits, being able to knock out more reps with every set, but then you get the pumps, right? Mm. You look bigger, and who doesn't want that? when you're working out in the gym. But to go back to your last point, there's been a lot of research in the last 2 years coming out of University of Arkansas and Mississippi State. And they're doing quite a bit in that area of looking at athletes and performance benefits with citrulline malate. And I think we're only going to see more of it, especially in women. There's only 2 studies right now, I believe, in women. And so it's an area that is growing. Most of the studies, and especially the earlier studies starting around 2010, have all been done in men. So just some growing interest in that as well.
Yeah, I think so too, that there will be more research on that area. And I think also there's been some research focusing on like cycling and endurance, but they haven't used citrulline malate. They've used mainly L-citrulline.
Yes.
So it would be interesting to see more studies with citrulline malate in that setting as well.
Yeah, there's a study that used citrulline, L-citrulline, in endurance, and it actually found that it decreased time to exhaustion, which is not exactly what you want for endurance, but you're taking away, I think with citrulline malate, the malic acid, that's what's being used for aerobic energy production. So you start using that for endurance athletes, I think we might see something completely different than what's been shown with just citrulline alone. I don't think we've exposed everything that citrulline malate can do, because if we know that it's used in the Krebs cycle, which is talking about aerobic or oxidative energy production, that's what endurance athletes use. So it could open up a whole new set of studies for that to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Krissy, thank you so much for your time. This was really fun to sit and discuss with you about citrulline malate. Is there anywhere people can find more information about you? Are you active on social media, for example?
Yes. Well, so like I said before, I am on bodybuilding.com. I write and edit on bodybuilding.com. I also have a column, Ask the Science Chick. So you can Google or search that on bodybuilding.com. And then I'm also on YouTube videos as well. So we try to get Ask the Science Chick videos and Instagram videos out. And so if you ever have questions, you can always ask them there, and I can always get to answer them. And then Instagram is just Krissy.Kendall1, and you can follow me on that as well.
Excellent. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening, or watching for you guys on YouTube. Krissy, once again, thank you so much for taking the time.
You.
And yeah, it's about time to go to bed here in Norway, but I don't know what time it is in
it's early afternoon.
Yeah, early afternoon. Yeah, okay. Okay, Krissy, thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.